There are exactly 3 sounds that can move Yong Sun. The click of a gun being cocked in an empty room, the silence after a man stops begging, and the sound of his own phone ringing at 4 a.m. He had built his empire on the principle that a king never flinches. 22 floors above Seoul, in a penthouse where the city lights looked like scattered diamonds, Yong Sun sat in the dark and ruled everything he could see. Whiskey, quiet, control. These were the only 3 things that had never failed him. He didn't look up when he heard her. She stood in the doorway of his study, the silk of her emerald robe catching the amber light from the lamp like she was made of something the dark couldn't touch. Juliana. She had been living under his roof for 6 weeks. Not as his lover, not as his prisoner. He hadn't decided what she was yet. He hadn't allowed himself to. That was the agreement he had made with the part of himself that still remembered what it felt like to love her. Don't look, don't feel, don't fracture. The phone rang. 4 a.m. exactly. No caller ID. He answered it the way he answered everything, with the face of a man who had already decided the outcome. But the voice on the other end didn't care about his face. She didn't betray you, Yong Sun. The whiskey glass stopped halfway to his mouth. She was protecting your daughter. 22 floors below, the city kept moving. Cars, rain, a world full of men who feared his name. And in a penthouse at the dead center of midnight, the king of the underground felt something move through his chest that no bullet had ever managed. His hand, the hand that had signed death warrants and shattered empires, trembled, faintly. Once. Behind him, Juliana hadn't moved. She stood in her emerald robe, like she had been waiting 3 years for exactly this moment. Like she already knew what the voice on the phone had just said. Like the secret she had been carrying was finally too heavy to hold alone. Yong Sun lowered the phone slowly. He turned and looked at her. Truly looked at her, for the first time since she had walked back into his life. And the cold heart that had ruled the underground for 15 years cracked straight down the middle. He didn't speak for a long time. That was the thing about Yong Sun. Silence was never empty when it came from him. It had weight, it had edges. Men had confessed to crimes they hadn't committed just to fill the silence he left in a room. But standing in his own penthouse, looking at Juliana across 15 feet of Italian marble and 3 years of buried grief, he had nothing. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She stood in that emerald robe with her arms loose at her sides, her chin level, her dark eyes holding something that looked almost like relief. Like a woman who had been holding her breath for so long that the moment of exposure felt like oxygen. How long? His voice came out quieter than he intended. That was the second thing tonight that had surprised him. He didn't like surprises. She was born 8 months after I left. Juliana's voice was steady, careful, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed this moment and then thrown away the script. I named her Sua. Sua. He turned the name over in his mind like a stone. It caught the light differently every time. You were in my house for 6 weeks, he said slowly. 6 weeks, Juliana. You ate at my table. You walked through these rooms. He looked around at the penthouse, the glass walls, the city below, the empire he had built brick by careful brick. It had always felt like a fortress. Now it felt like a display case. And you said nothing. I was waiting. For what? She met his eyes. To see if you were still someone worth telling. The words landed the way she meant them to. Not as an insult, but as a verdict. He understood the difference. He had delivered enough of both to know. He set the phone down on the desk beside his whiskey glass. Both sat untouched now. He crossed the room slowly, not toward her, but to the window. 22 floors below, Seoul moved in its quiet 4 a.m. rhythm, indifferent to the fact that the man who controlled half its underground was standing here, undone by a 3-year-old's name. He had a daughter. The thought kept arriving like it couldn't find anywhere to settle. He had built a world designed to protect what mattered and destroy what threatened it. And somewhere out there, the most important thing in his life had been breathing and growing and learning to walk without him ever knowing she existed. Where is she? He asked the window. He heard Juliana exhale behind him, a long, slow breath. Deciding. Safe, she said finally. Hidden. Somewhere your enemies can't reach. Your enemies. He closed his eyes. She meant his brothers. He called Hun at 5 a.m., not because Hun was the most loyal man in his organization, but because Hun was the most methodical. The kind of man who kept records of records, who photographed the photographs, who had spent 12 years as Yong Sun's lead enforcer, not by being the most dangerous man in the room, but by being the most prepared. I need you to pull the Juliana file, Yong Sun said. Everything. The photographs, the surveillance logs, the contact reports, everything that was handed to me 3 years ago. A pause. That file was sealed by senior council order. I know who sealed it. Yong Sun's voice didn't rise, it never did. Open it anyway. By 6:30 a.m., Hyun was sitting across from him at the penthouse desk with a laptop and a face that had gone the careful, neutral gray of a man processing something he wished he hadn't found. Juliana had retreated to her room. Yong Sun hadn't asked her to stay. That was its own kind of mercy, for both of them. Talk, Yong Sun said. Hyun turned the laptop to face him. The original photographs, the ones that had shown Juliana meeting with a rival broker, laughing, passing an envelope, had metadata. Every digital file did. Hyun had run them through an authentication tool that hadn't existed 3 years ago. The timestamps were wrong. The shadow angles didn't match the location's recorded weather that day. Someone had composited her face onto another woman's body with surgical precision, and the confidence of people who knew no one would look twice. Because why would they? The king had trusted his counsel. Who built it? Yong Sun asked. Hyun pulled up a second file. Communication logs, buried 4 layers deep in a server that was supposed to be decommissioned. Fragments of conversations between senior council members, men Yong Sun had known for over a decade. Men who had stood at his side at funerals and celebrations, and the quiet, brutal moments in between. One name appeared more than the others. Chairman Baek. The man who had personally delivered the photographs to Yong Sun 3 years ago. Who had stood in this very room, voice heavy with manufactured grief, and said, "I'm sorry, brother. You deserve to know the truth." Yong Sun stared at the name for a long time. He had given Baek territory worth $40 million when he restructured the council 6 months after Juliana left. A reward for loyalty, for honesty. He had paid the man who destroyed his family. "Does anyone else know you pulled this?" he asked. "No." "Keep it that way." He closed the laptop. "Get your go bag. You're not going back to council headquarters." Hyun didn't ask why. That was the thing about a man who kept records. He already understood what happened to people who knew too much. So did Yong Sun. The difference was, this time, he was the one who'd been kept in the dark. They drove for 2 hours before Juliana told him to turn off the main road. No convoy, no escort. Yong Sun had left Hun at a safe house on the edge of the city with instructions to speak to no one and trust no one. And then he had done something he hadn't done in 15 years. He had driven himself. Juliana sat in the passenger seat in clothes she'd changed into before dawn. Dark jeans, a cream sweater, her hair pulled back. She watched the road instead of him. She had given him directions in quiet, measured increments, like she was deciding how much to reveal with every kilometer they covered. He didn't push. He drove. The city dissolved behind them. The highway became a 2-lane road, which became a gravel path cutting through dense pine forest. The sky was pale gray and heavy with the kind of early morning silence that made Seoul feel like a different planet entirely. "Stop here," Juliana said. He stopped. She got out first. He followed. The air was cold and sharp and smelled like pine resin and wet earth. Nothing like the recycled, climate-controlled air of his penthouse. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd breathed something real. They walked a narrow trail for 10 minutes. Then the trees opened up. The house was small, deliberately so. A single-story structure in weathered wood and stone, half hidden by the hillside like it had grown there rather than been built. A garden along the south wall, dormant now in the cold. A child's red rain boots sitting neatly on the front step. Yong Sun stopped walking. He stared at those boots for a moment longer than made sense. They were so small. That was the thing that hit him. Not the house, not the remoteness, not the 3 years of careful, deliberate hiding that this place represented. Just the size of those red boots, waiting on a step like they belonged to someone who expected to come back to them. Because she did. Because this was her home, his daughter's home, a place he hadn't built, hadn't chosen, hadn't known existed. The door opened before Juliana knocked. An older woman stood in the frame, mid-60s, silver-haired, eyes that moved immediately to Yong Sun with the flat, measuring gaze of someone who had been warned about him and had decided to form her own opinion. A caretaker. Trusted. The kind of woman who didn't rattle easily. She looked at Juliana. Something passed between them. A question, an answer, a 3-year understanding compressed into 2 seconds. Then, she stepped aside. The house was warm inside. It smelled like breakfast and something sweet. Crayons were scattered across a low table near the window. A child's drawings covered the wall in a long, colorful row. Trees, animals, stick figures holding hands in the sun. Yong Sun stood in the doorway of the living room and heard from somewhere down the hall the small, unhurried sound of a child waking up. She came down the hallway in a yellow pajama, set printed with small white rabbits, her hair a soft cloud of dark curls that hadn't been brushed yet, one hand dragging a worn stuffed bear by its ear. She stopped when she saw him. Yong Sun didn't move, didn't speak. He understood, in a way that had nothing to do with strategy, that the next 10 seconds belonged entirely to her. Sua looked at him the way only very small children and very old people look at strangers, with complete, unguarded assessment. No performance, no filter. Just 2 large dark eyes moving over his face like she was reading something written there that he couldn't see himself. Then she looked at Juliana. "Mama, who is that?" Juliana crossed the room and knelt beside her, smoothing a curl back from her daughter's face with the ease of 10,000 mornings of doing exactly that. "That's someone very important," she said quietly. "His name is Yong Sun." Sua considered this, then she looked back at him. "Why does he look sad?" The question landed somewhere behind his sternum and didn't leave. He had been called many things over the course of his life. Ruthless, brilliant, dangerous, untouchable. No one, not once in 15 years of running an empire, had ever looked at him and seen sad. He crouched down slowly, putting himself at her level. This close, he could see the details that had been invisible from across the room. The way her eyes tilted slightly at the corners, the same way his did. The shape of her hands wrapped around the bear's worn ear. Small, perfect, entirely real. "I missed something important," he said, "for a long time." Sua thought about this with the gravity of a child who takes all things seriously. Then she held the bear out toward him. "Gom fixes things," she said simply. "You can hold him." He looked at the bear. Threadbare, one button eye slightly askew, loved into a state well beyond dignity and completely past caring. He took it. He didn't know why his throat tightened the way it did. He was not a man built for moments like this. He had no architecture for them. No training, no prepared response. Every skill he had spent 15 years sharpening was useless here. In this warm little house that smelled like breakfast, with a 3-year-old watching him hold her bear with the patient confidence of someone who already knew it would help. Something in his chest, the cold, sealed, carefully maintained center of him, gave way. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a slow, internal shift like ice at the very first edge of a thaw, quiet, irreversible. He handed the bear back gently. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it in a way that had nothing to do with the bear. Sua smiled at him, wide, uncomplicated, freely given, and in that moment, Yong Sun understood with complete clarity that he would burn his entire empire to the ground before he let a single shadow from it touch her. The king was still there, but something older had just taken the throne. The first sign was the birds. Yong Sun had spent enough time in hostile territory to know that silence has a texture. The forest around the sanctuary had been a steady, quiet hum of wind and small sounds all morning. When that changed, when the birds stopped, he was already moving before his mind had fully named why. He was across the kitchen in 4 steps. "Xian," he kept his voice flat and low, phone already at his ear. "How compromised is the penthouse line? A beat? Then? Enough." That was all he needed. He ended the call and turned to find Juliana already standing in the kitchen doorway, reading his face the way she always had, with a precision that had once unnerved him and now felt like the most useful thing in the room. "How long do we have?" she asked. "Minutes, maybe less." She didn't freeze, didn't ask how they found them, didn't waste a single second on panic. She turned immediately toward the hallway. "Mrs. Cho, take Sua to the back room, the one with no windows, now." The older woman appeared from the living room already holding Sua against her hip, the child's face puzzled but calm, trusting the urgency in her mother's voice enough to press her cheek against Mrs. Cho's shoulder without complaint. The bear was tucked firmly under one small arm. Yong Sun watched them disappear down the hall and felt something harden in him. Not the old coldness, not the emotional paralysis that had ruled him for 15 years. Something different, sharper, cleaner. The cold heart had been a cage. What he felt now was a perimeter. The first vehicle came up the gravel path without headlights. A professional choice, which meant Baek had sent professionals. Yong Sun counted engine sounds. 2 vehicles, 4 men each, minimum. He had his weapon, the geography of a building he'd been inside for less than 4 hours. He looked at Juliana. She was already at the kitchen counter, pulling a locked box from behind a panel beneath the lower cabinet. A panel she had cut herself, he realized, in a house she had designed specifically to survive this moment. Inside the box, a compact handgun, 2 loaded magazines, a burner phone, and a folded paper with handwritten coordinates he didn't recognize. She had always known this day might come. She had built for it quietly, alone, without him. He took one of the magazines. She took the other. "The east window," she said. "Blind spot on the approach from the road." "I see it." He did. "You've done this before." "I've thought about it every day for 3 years." She met his eyes, steady and clear. No one is getting to her, not today. Outside, the gravel crunched under careful feet. Inside, the king of the underground stood shoulder to shoulder with the woman who had outplanned everyone, including him. And the serpents had no idea what was waiting in the dark. It was over in 11 minutes. Yong Sun knew because he counted. Counting was something to do with the part of his mind that wasn't entirely occupied with keeping both of them alive. The east window held the blind spot exactly as Juliana had said. The first 2 men came through the tree line in a practiced spread, moving like people who had done this before and expected the house to be soft. A woman, a child, maybe 1 guard. A quick, clean extraction. They hadn't accounted for her. Juliana had positioned herself at the corner of the hallway where the angle covered both the front entry and the kitchen window simultaneously. A geometry Yong Sun recognized as deliberate. She hadn't stumbled into that position. She had calculated it. Probably years ago, alone in this house in the dark, while Sua slept and the trees creaked around her, running through the scenario until she knew it by heart. The first man through the front door met Yong Sun. He didn't get back up. The second came through the kitchen window and found Juliana already there. Her stance clean, her grip controlled, her eyes carrying none of the fear he might have expected, and all of the resolution he absolutely should have. She fired once, low. Dropped him without killing him. "We may need him to talk," she said, entirely calm, already moving to the next position. He stared at her for half a second. "You had nursing training," he said. "I know exactly where to shoot a person so they live long enough to answer questions." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "Move, 2 more on the south side." He moved. The next 9 minutes were a controlled demolition. Yong Sun handled the exterior. 2 men who had circled behind the woodpile. A third who had been waiting by the vehicles as backup and hadn't expected the principal target to come to him. Yong Sun disarmed him with the efficiency of someone who had long since stopped thinking about it as violence and started thinking about it as logistics. When it was over, 4 men were restrained and breathing. The house was intact. The back room was silent and secure. Yong Sun stood in the cold morning air and looked at the tree line and breathed. Juliana came to stand beside him. There was a cut along her forearm, shallow, already clotting, where she had caught a doorframe in the dark. She hadn't mentioned it. She wasn't mentioning it now. He reached over and took her arm gently, turning it to look at the cut. She let him. That, more than anything that had happened in the last 2 hours, felt significant. "You built all of this," he said quietly. "This house, the safe room, the contingency. You built it alone." "I had to." A pause. "You weren't here." He didn't look away from the cut. "I'm here now." She was quiet for a moment, then, very softly, "I know. He left before dawn." Juliana didn't try to stop him. She stood in the doorway of the sanctuary with her arms crossed against the cold, watching him walk to the car with the quiet understanding of a woman who had learned, over years and at great cost, the difference between a man leaving and a man going to finish something. He drove back to Seoul alone. The city was still gray and half awake when he reached the district where the rival faction heads kept their morning offices. The restaurants and private clubs that functioned as boardrooms for men who didn't appear on any corporate registry. He had done business in these rooms for 15 years. He knew every face, every pressure point, every unspoken rule. He called ahead, 3 meetings, back to back. No security, no posturing, just the numbers. The first meeting lasted 40 minutes. He laid the offer on the table the way he would have laid down a weapon, carefully with both hands visible. His northern territory, the port contracts, the distribution infrastructure that had taken 8 years to build. Everything above the Han River, structured as a clean transfer with no bloodshed, no retaliation triggers, no strings attached to his name. In exchange, a blood peace. A formal, witnessed guarantee that Juliana and Seoul would move through the world untouchable. That his name, for whatever it was still worth, would function as a permanent shield around his family, even after it was no longer attached to any throne. The first faction head said yes, in 30 minutes. The second in 20. They both recognized what they were seeing. Not a king in retreat. A king making a final, deliberate move and offering something so valuable, so cleanly, that refusing it would be the more dangerous choice. The third meeting ran longer. An older man, more cautious. He studied the documents Hun had drawn up, the asset valuations, the transfer agreements, and then he studied Yong Sun's face across the table for a long time. "You're giving up everything," he said finally. "I'm trading up," Yong Sun said. The man was quiet. Then he picked up the pen. By noon, 3 signatures sat on a single document that restructured the entire architecture of Seoul's underground without a single shot fired. Hyun witnessed it from a corner of the room, his expression the careful neutral of a man who was watching history and choosing not to react to it. In the car afterward, Yong Sun sat for a moment before starting the engine. The penthouse, the territory, the empire that had defined every waking hour of his adult life. All of it signed away in a morning. All of it exchanged for the right of a woman in an emerald robe and a 3-year-old with a worn bear to walk through the world without looking over their shoulders. He started the engine. One meeting remained. The one that hadn't been scheduled. The one that couldn't be resolved with paperwork. Chairman Baek was still waiting for his answer. Baek had chosen the location himself. A parking structure on the south edge of the financial district, 6 floors up, open to the sky. Rain had been falling for an hour by the time Yong Sun arrived. The heavy, indifferent kind that turned everything gray and made the city lights bleed into the wet pavement below. Baek stood near the edge of the structure with 2 men flanking him, his silver hair damp, his coat immaculate. A man who still believed this was a negotiation. Yong Sun came alone. "You gave away the North Territory," Baek said as a greeting. Not a question. He had sources everywhere, or thought he did. "I heard you were in meetings all morning, cutting deals." He shook his head slowly, performing disappointment with the ease of long practice. "You've lost perspective, Yong Sun. A woman and a child have made you sentimental." "They've made me clear." Yong Sun stopped 10 feet away. The rain was cold on his shoulders. He didn't move to adjust his collar. "There's a difference." "Clarity." Baek smiled. "Is that what you call dismantling 15 years of work in a single morning?" "I call it knowing what the work was actually for." Something shifted behind Baek's eyes. The performance thinned slightly, the way a mask will when the person wearing it grows tired. Underneath was not remorse. Not justification. Just the flat, pragmatic calculus of a man who had decided, long ago, that sentiment was a resource to exploit in others and eliminate in himself. "I offered you peace," Yong Sun said. "The same terms I offered everyone else this morning. Full transfer, clean lines, no retaliation. And I'm declining." Baek's voice was pleasant, because a king without a throne is just a man, and men can be managed. Yong Sun reached into his jacket. Baek's guards moved, hands going to weapons, weight shifting forward, trained responses to a trained gesture. Yong Sun placed a single folded document on the hood of the nearest car. He stepped back. That's a full forensic record of the fabrication. Every layer of the doctored photographs, every communication between you and the men you used to build it. He paused. Hun is filing copies simultaneously with two rival faction heads, a prosecutor who has been building a case against the council for 4 years, and a journalist whose number I was given by someone who knew this day would come. The rain fell. Bake stared at the document. The pleasant expression had gone entirely now. If anything happens to Juliana, to Seoul, to anyone connected to me, Yong Sun continued, those files go public within the hour. Your name, your voice recordings, everything. He let that settle, or you take the piece and walk away with what you have. One of the guards looked at Bake. Bake said nothing for a long time. The rain filled the silence between them. Patient and cold and entirely indifferent to what kings decided in the dark. Finally, Bake's chin dropped. Barely. Once, it was enough. 4 years later, the garden was full of noise. Not the kind of noise Yong Sun had spent his life navigating. The coded silences, the weighted pauses, the sounds that meant someone was about to make a decision that couldn't be unmade. This was a different kind entirely. The kind made by a 7-year-old who had discovered that if you dropped a mango into the fish pond, the koi would go absolutely insane. Sua. Juliana's voice carried the particular tone of a woman choosing her battles. Put the fruit down. I'm doing an experiment. You're doing chaos. There's a difference. Yong Sun sat on the low wooden steps of the back porch and watched his daughter carefully set the mango down. Not throw it, not put it back, but set it in a specific location she would clearly remember and return to, and then run toward the far end of the garden with the bear tucked under her arm. Gom went everywhere. He was missing his second button eye now, and had been repaired so many times that he was essentially a different bear wearing the same soul. Yong Sun had fixed the ear himself 3 weeks ago. It had taken him 40 minutes and 2 failed attempts. Juliana had watched from the doorway without saying anything, which was how he knew she had found it significant. The house was nothing like the penthouse. It was wide and low and surrounded by enough land that Sua could run until she tired, which took longer than any reasonable person would expect. The nearest city was 40 minutes away. Hun called once a month with updates on the world they'd left behind. Bake's quiet removal from power, the slow restructuring of the council, the way an empire dissolves when its center refuses to hold. Yong Sun listened, asked a few questions, and returned to whatever he had been doing. Usually something ordinary, usually something he had never had before. Juliana came to sit beside him on the steps. She carried 2 cups of tea and handed him one without asking if he wanted it, because she already knew that he did, and that was still, after everything, one of the small miracles of his daily life. Being known without it being used against him. Below them, Sua had found a stick and was conducting some form of investigation in the flower bed that would require explaining later. She asked me this morning, Juliana said, if you used to be important. He looked at her. What did you tell her? I told her you used to think you were. A pause, the kind that had warmth in it, and that you got smarter. He looked at his daughter in the garden, wild-haired, loud, magnificent, entirely unimpressed by the legacy of fear that had once attached to his name, and felt something that had no word in any language he'd been taught to use. He drank his tea. The secret was gone. Only the truth remained. And the truth, it turned out, was this: a garden, a girl, and a woman who had waited long enough for him to deserve it.